Welcome back to another episode of the Advanced Colorado Rundown. I'm Kristi Burton Brown, Executive Vice President. Today I'm joined by Janelle Goodrich, the founder and executive director of From Silence to Save, a very important anti-human trafficking organization here in Colorado. And Janelle, can you fill our listeners in on more of your work and what you do? I know you show up on scene with law enforcement in human trafficking investigations.
Yeah, so From Silence to Save, which we refer to as FSTS, is we are a nonprofit, and we are a third-party case management organization that serves victims and survivors of human trafficking. And so we do case management and advocacy from recovery all the way through the end and completion of their case, and we take a holistic approach. So it's really nice to be partnered with law enforcement and attorneys and all of these other governmental organizations, but we don't work for them. Mm-hmm. We're not directed by them, and vice versa. And we can be there and be that person on scene for that person in a very hard moment at recovery, to know that someone's there that cares about them, that is not law enforcement, is not a prosecutor, and kind of walk with them. There's so many different people that come into their lives as professionals from start to finish of their case, and we just kind of become that one constant for them, but also making sure that there's definitely justice in their case and what happened to them.
Yeah, no, that's so important. And
yes.
The reason we're talking to Janelle today is because Advanced Colorado is proposing a ballot measure, and we worked with Janelle on the language. She has worked for a long time on specific language dealing with heightening sentences for people with online solicitation of children. In our ballot measure, we'll also address heightened sentencing for child predators. People who commit sexual abuse against children in Colorado and sexual assault against children are probation eligible. Many of them get out with serving no jail time whatsoever. So many issues in this area of criminal law in Colorado. And Janelle is specifically an expert on the online solicitation of children and why our laws in Colorado need to change in that regard. So we've brought her in today to give some deeper insight into this language and just the concept of this ballot measure and why we need it here in Colorado.
Well, and this particular change that I am really wanting to see move forward and pass doesn't just encompass the online solicitation. It encompasses all solicitation of children for commercial sexual activity. And not only does it talk about if you are to purchase a child online, which most of those acts and dates are set up online. It also, if you physically go to a hotel to have sexual interactions with a child in exchange of money or something of value, if you are internet luring that person, anything like that, it goes through all of it. Actually covers 7 different statutes, and they all encompass together, and none of them are mandatory prison, and they're all happening a lot every single day.
And I think that's one thing, Janelle, I'd really like you to talk about more, is the problem in Colorado laws. Like, it's not as if it's legal to do this in Colorado. It's against the law. It is a crime, but it's not a serious crime. And the sentencing ranges are really problematic. So can you speak to that?
I think that when you say things like it's not a serious crime legally, I think that depending on who you say that to might disagree, because it is a class 3 felony. And I think people think that that's really high, but in Colorado, a class 3 felony does not mean mandatory Department of Corrections time. It means that you can still get probation. Some of these things you might not even have to register as a sex offender, which I feel like isn't as big of a push or a deterrent for people, because even if you fail to register, it's a class 6 felony, which is nothing.
Yeah. Not really a big deal when it comes to sentencing at all.
No.
And I think that's one thing we're seeing in crimes across Colorado. Advanced Colorado does a lot of public safety, criminal law work, and we see that a lot of crimes, so we'd be like, oh, it's totally against the law in Colorado, we're fine, we're safe. But what they don't pay attention to, because it's usually not in the news, or DAs don't always talk about what they confront in cases, but in practicality, in real life, we see many of these DAs unable to charge people with a high enough sentence to put dangerous criminals or child predators away in jail. They don't have as many options in their toolbox, so to speak, as I think a lot of them would like to have.
Yeah, and I think that that's a multifold issue. I don't think that DAs aren't trying.
Exactly.
I think that the caseload is more than enough than the resources that we have, or the amount of prosecutors that are there. There's definitely more crime coming in than there are,
Yes.
prosecutors.
Yes.
And I think that makes it hard. And sometimes if you have, say, a victim that is no longer cooperating or no longer in communication, sometimes they have to make decisions. And I understand that as well. But the prosecutors that I know and that I work with and have spoken to very much, they would like these men to be put away.
Exactly.
And then they go towards plea deals, right? And they have to plead them down to something, which that has nothing to do with them. That doesn't mean that they're being lazy or that they don't care. But now they don't have someone to talk. There's not a victim there anymore. Or even if there is, and then there's plea deals down, and then that goes into the recidivism, right? So when you see that crime is down, but if we're not tracking certain crimes, then of course it's going to go down. Or if we're not putting people away and convicting them of it, then of course it's going to go down. And that inherently becomes an issue.
Right. Well, and to your point, Janelle, about how hard DAs work and what a caseload they have in Colorado. I mean, U.S. News and World Report recently said Colorado is the third most dangerous state in the nation, largely based on the amount of crimes that are committed that prosecutors have to do something about. And just like you've talked to a lot of them, we've spoken to some as well who really feel like the state law in Colorado limits how they can deal with these criminals.
Correct.
And sort of puts them in a box and says, well, it doesn't matter if you actually see this is a dangerous child predator who should be put away in jail. You actually are put in a box where probation is going to be the most likely outcome.
Most likely, and is the most likely outcome. Because, a class 3 felony on some of these are anywhere from 2 to 8 or 4 to 8 or 4 to 12. But it's not mandatory.
No mandatory jail.
No mandatory jail at all. And when you're facing a sexual offense on a child, of course you're going to fight for something lower. And that seems to be what happens most of the time. It's not the laws that are the issue. It's the sentencing ranges that are the issue. It's if it says in the sentencing guidelines, may or shall.
Absolutely. Yeah. So small words that make all the difference and really affect the outcome of these crimes, and then whether or not people go out and repeat it over and over.
And that's why it's so important to cover all of those statutes,
it is.
Not just one, because if you do one, then the plea deal just becomes to the next one, and that's what their defense attorney is going to say, well, he'll plead to pandering.
Exactly.
Of a child instead of solicitation of a child. And so just blanket covering it. So if you do it, then you're going to pay. And you still are only serving about 33% of your time. So worst case scenario, you're spending, 18 months in jail.
And what would be your recommendation? Obviously, people can read through the language, but if you can kind of talk about it for people, contrast what you see right now in the sentencing ranges, the probation eligibility, and what you would like to see ideally in a law.
Currently, we see mostly probation, right? I also think that when you see a charge that doesn't have a lot of bang for its buck, it's really hard to throw a lot of resources at it. And when we dwindle down laws and sentencings for crimes committed, then we kind of start a culture that this isn't that big of a deal.
Right, exactly.
Right? And so if you murder someone, obviously that's mandatory.
Yes, jail
Department of Corrections. If you traffic a child, it is mandatory jail time. But if you traffic an adult, it's not mandatory jail time. So that means that if you recover a child at 17, you're going to jail. If you find out that child's being trafficked at 17. But then, let's say the next morning she has a birthday and she's recovered 12 hours later. Now all of a sudden, when they're caught, it's not mandatory jail time. And the difference between a child and an adult for me is 60 seconds, and everyone else, whether they want to realize it or not. And when you have trauma and all of those things, they're still children, right? They still have trauma. They're still operating from that place of trauma. And I have older teenagers, and I'm telling you, they are not adults yet. And so when we dwindle things down like that, we make it okay.
Well, and I think a lot of people would be disturbed to know that even human trafficking of adults isn't a big crime in Colorado.
Kristi, a lot of people Google, right? And they're like, what happens if you do this? The way that it reads on a lot of these sites is it seems like it's mandatory, but it doesn't talk about the fact that it is probation eligible. And it's probation eligible in a lot of states. But I do think there's 34 maybe 30-something states that have much stricter human trafficking laws than Colorado does.
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, and for anyone who's been paying attention to the public safety crime scene in Colorado, that should come as no surprise, because in almost every area of criminal law, we have lesser penalties than most states, whether we're talking about fentanyl drug dealers, which their penalty was lowered recently by the legislature in Colorado. If we're talking about human trafficking of adults or kids, child sexual abuse, if you're talking about theft in Colorado, just all the crimes that plague our states. Correct. In large part, it's because the DAs, who are trying their best, aren't able to go get effective sentences against criminals of all varieties.
Well, it's hard to bring in more DAs to do that when we don't have any money to do it. And then we want to have conversations about putting programs in place, right, to rehabilitate these people, which I'm not against, but because we're not doing that effectively either, it doesn't mean that we don't have accountability, and it doesn't mean that we don't have some type of punishment for these people who commit these crimes. It also does not mean that we don't need to contain them for a certain amount of time until they can be rehabilitated so they don't make more victims.
Right, well, just putting them back out on the street, probation, go back home, is not a good solution for all the children who've been victimized.
The majority of the trials that I have, been working on and working with victims on and walking through with them, almost all of them have something where after that trial, there's a habitual trial, right? Where it means that they've done this same type of crime so many times, now they're never going to leave the community and be out in the community again. That just shows you the type of predators that these people are, whether it's the traffickers or the buyers.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, and that's actually one thing that this ballot measure that we are looking into and going before title board, that it would deal with, is on the sexual assault part against children. In Colorado right now, if you sexually assault multiple different children one time each, you remain probation eligible.
Correct.
And so it's just, there's so many awful loopholes in Colorado law.
It's the same with solicitation. It's just certain felonies that you do that. So
right. No, it's. I think if people were to actually read the law on it in Colorado, they would be amazed at how it makes absolutely no sense. It doesn't punish some of the worst criminals, and it just releases them back out on the street so they can harm more children. I mean, that's the actual result of what's going on.
I agree, and I also think that people don't understand that human trafficking is nothing like the movies, right? It's not like Taken. It's not like Sound of Freedom. If you want to know about international trafficking and hear that story, those are great movies to watch. But it has nothing to do with what's happening to Colorado kids by Colorado men.
Yeah.
Whether it is the Colorado men selling them or whether it is the Colorado men buying them.
Yeah, no.
It is a supply and demand issue, and if men didn't buy them, pimps wouldn't sell them. It's pretty simple.
And can you actually, in talking about buying them, especially online, since that's often where it happens, though certainly not only where it happens, internet luring in particular, do you have any statistics or stories here
for like
in
the
Colorado?
ICAC cases and things? So I do know that right now, just since the 23rd started this January, they have a pretty dedicated, sex assault and ICAC team and things like that ran down there. And I was told that just since January, they have 20 plus cases of one area that is rural in Douglas County where men have been driving over an hour to have sexual contact with someone who they believed was 14 years old. Yep. It's like fish in a barrel.
And crazy.
And every time you put up one of these sting operations, you're going to get someone.
Yeah. No, and I think Douglas County does a good job trying to get those people. And the question being, how many more are out there who aren't being caught? And then you catch them, can you give them an effective sentence that puts them away? And yes, if rehabilitation is possible, great. But I think the main point being, get them away from society, get them away from children, instead of putting them right back in the scenario they were already in.
And don't just give the money to make sure that we can house these people when they are arrested, because it will cost more money to house them. And because I promise you that the jails will fill up quicker because they're out there. Right. But also be putting the money into the prisons and the Department of Corrections systems to make sure that you can teach them, can rehabilitate them. Yeah. I'm a big proponent for John schools, where even when they purchase an adult for sex, that I think that they should be sentenced to a John school where someone sits there and teaches them how buying sex, even if you think that person is doing it on their own free will, and maybe very, very few are. I have yet to know anyone that doesn't have that in their past, at least, while now doing it by their own free will. showing them how they are helping drive the
Right,
movement of human trafficking.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. If they're sleeping with 30 women, 29 of them have a pimp. Guaranteed.
Well, and I'll ask you too, if a ballot measure like this, or if the legislature decided to pass a law giving better sentencing ranges, meaning heavier ones, on people who target children, do you think it would have obviously you could go catch more of the people, you could sentence them, you could put them away, so therefore get more of them out of society. Do you think it would also persuade some of those people to not participate in this kind of activity, or do you think it has no effect there?
I do. I think deterrents matter, right? I know murders happen a lot still, right? And there's obviously that deterrent, what will happen to you. There's always the ones that are going to think that they can get away with it, right? And I also think that when you see human trafficking cases, so many of them are just going after the trafficker. They're not going after the Johns, the men who were buying them, right? And so that could blow cases wide open. Maybe there's a little bit more investigation that goes into it, and now they're tracing back to all these Johns because they know they can actually arrest them and hold them. And something's going to happen. And so then the case gets bigger, right? And then more people become involved in the case, and then it's larger. It's great to show for the community that they're combating this. I think that that's really great in that aspect. I also think that when people hear that if you are convicted of this and any of the sister crimes that surround it that you could be pled to differently, you are going to do jail time, maybe it won't be worth it. Maybe they'll card these people before they have sex with them, because that's not happening right now, you know? And a lot of these 15, 16, 17-year-old girls, you'd be surprised at their age, but it doesn't matter. They're still children.
No, absolutely.
Yes.
And what another piece of this, I think, is the offender registry that people have to register for. I think there's some changes that should happen there. Can you speak to those?
I don't know if it's necessarily changes. I think that it's more manpower to actually making sure that people are actually following up and registering and doing what they're supposed to do. I'm a big fan of the sex offender supervised probation for sex offenders. It's SOISP. And it's extremely difficult, and I'm a really big fan of it because you have to go through a polygraph. You have to take accountability for everything you've done, and not just the victim that you are being sentenced for, but any other victims too. And that's why they do that on a polygraph.
Yes.
And they really have to work through that program to take accountability. So I'm a big fan of SOISP, and I would really hope that anybody that ever were to purchase a child would have to be on SOISP.
And right now, is that optional? Is it DA's office by DA's office, or what's the standard? I think it's
all of the above.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, different avenues, I think, then to crack down on criminals like this, crimes like this. Would you be willing to share with our listeners, like, what drove you to get involved in this area? It's obviously a very serious area with a lot of tragedies that go on, but you're also helping people recover. So what motivated you?
So I personally have, like, my background and my degree is in theology, right? And so I would talk about epistemology and apologetics, and then I ended up working in cults and assisting with that, where one day I ended up with a human trafficking victim unbeknownst to me. And that human trafficking victim actually was already working with the FBI Child Exploitation Task Force and Human Trafficking Task Force. And so just kind of like, what's going on? What can we do to help this kid?
Yeah.
It just branched into bigger, and then I ended up getting referred more and helping with those. There was just a lot of, I needed to do more.
Yeah.
And so I just bagged it all and started FSTS, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
no, people definitely have a huge impact on our lives when we meet them, and then find our callings and where we need to work. So that's,
absolutely. I also I lost my mother at a young age, and back then there was no human trafficking laws. They were just prostitutes. My mother ended up getting executed by MS-13, and she was a human trafficking victim, but it wasn't a law then, so that's not what it was looked at. That was back in the 90s.
Wow.
So unbeknownst to me, it did touch me, but that's not why I got into it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It came for me no matter what.
Right. You were gonna be part of helping people recover, and saving some lives along the way too, I'm
I
sure.
don't know if I'm saving lives, but I
think your work probably does.
I really enjoy being with them.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, I guess as we wrap up, Janelle, thank you for introducing our audience to a lot of these ideas. I don't think a lot of people are familiar with laws against child predators here in Colorado and a lack of effective sentencing. So is there any last thoughts you'd like to leave with people, or things that people should know, remember, work on related to this
one
area?
thing I want to talk about is when I said about Colorado men and, Colorado buyers, is that Denver is absolutely on the circuit for the human trafficking circuit, which is where it goes to LA, Oklahoma City, here in Denver, Houston, all of that. And we'll go out and do some outreach sometimes. And sometimes when girls come in after, they're recovered or whatnot, I ask them, I'm like, why do you guys keep coming back to Denver? You've been on all these places.
Yeah.
And they said, because the Johns flow free here. And that is when I started looking at the sentencing issues and gaps. And that's when I really got a passion to make sure to fix this. So I do think that if they couldn't flow so free here, maybe we wouldn't have such a problem.
Yeah, and meaning that it's easy to do whatever you want here.
Correct.
And to buy people, including children, online.
That was out of the mouth of a survivor.
Wow. I mean, that's, very, very impactful. And I think people need to wake up and see what's happening in so many areas in our state. So thank you, Janelle. You've been on another episode of the Advanced Colorado Rundown. I'm Kristi Burton Brown, joined with Janelle Goodrich today. Join us next time for another episode.